If you're lucky enough to get the chance to name a car, you should pick a name that's obvious to pronounce. Even though Ford picked a car name with just 2 letters, probably a record unless you count cars like the Ford Model T, people have found multiple ways of pronouncing the car that we're talking about. Is it the car, the ca, or simply the K-A? Even Ford didn't seem to know, with their marketing department using all 3 ways to say it. It seems to me that the name was a clever play on the word car, and if Ford isn't clear on how you pronounce it, then that's the way I'm going to go with it, in this video at least. In the 1990s, Ford was known for predictable, dependable cars, but no one looked to Ford for funky, innovative styling. So where did the wild looks of the car come from? Was it a hit? And how did Ford try to continue the car tradition? This is the Ford car story. The Ford Fiesta had been celebrating its success in the car sales chart since its introduction in 1976, but by the early 1990s, Ford saw dark clouds on the horizon. More customers were preferring smaller cars, which was good, but they were looking for more style. The Fiesta was a good, solid car, but it couldn't exactly be described as fun or frivolous. Renault launched the Twingo in France, where it caused a storm, first at the Paris Motor Show and then in Renault showrooms. Clearly, there was a desire for a small car that was fun without breaking the bank. And there's the rub: without breaking the bank, anyone can make a fun little car that costs an arm and a leg, but doing it on a budget, that's a different matter. Any new car would have to sell well to recoup the development cost, but even then, customers expected a car smaller than the Fiesta to cost less, and there weren't high margins on that high volume car. Ford made a profit on the Fiesta precisely because they sold so many of them. Renault had performed some economic gymnastics to get the Twingo produced for such a low cost. Customers looking for character had been buying Minis and Citroën 2CVs, but 2CV production had ended and the Mini likely was going to go the same way. Maybe there was a gap in the European car market for something new. Making Ford's new small city car on a budget was solved, at least in theory, by some creative thinking. Rather than create a brand new chassis like Renault had done, they'd reuse the old 1989 Fiesta platform and manufacture the new car in Valencia in Spain, where the Fiesta was being produced already. If it didn't sell well, then there's not really a problem. Ford was only reusing existing tooling. If it did sell well, then the tooling could be renewed using the profits they got from the new car. The underlying chassis was sorted then, and Ford would of course reuse engines and transmissions from the Fiesta. But what shape should the new car have? Instead of looking to European cars for inspiration, Ford looked to Japan, where small K cars were king. Honda had introduced the Pininfarina-style Beat Roadster in 1991, and Ford's partner Mazda had been selling the diminutive 121 for many years. In 1992, Ford's styling team was given a challenge: design a city car that was cute, playful, fun, yet was sophisticated with a premium feel. Oh, and make it cheaper than the Fiesta, so no pressure then. Early sketches showed a low car with a pronounced rear, but by the summer of 1993, the stylists had created 2 clay models. The first was cute and filled with oval flourishes that were the latest Ford style ever since the oval grilled Mondeo launched the previous year. The second went for a small V toothbrush grille, but more importantly, a higher roofline. Debate raged within Ford on whether they should make the car taller. It increased interior space by allowing seats to be more upright, but would customers accept it? The same debate would happen a couple of years later on the Escort's successor, the Ford Focus. Both designs had Mini-esque cute round lights along with oval windows. The Fiesta and Escort updates were going to get the same oval family update, but this new car was going to be a fashion leader, not a follower, and it was expected to launch after both the Fiesta and Escort had launched anyway. Maybe the designers should try something different. Showing just how fast Ford could turn on a dime, just a couple of months later, they'd created 2 new styles in a single clay model. One side of the car had a low slit headlight, but the other side showed a new interest in intersecting lines, from the triangle headlights to the rear lights that could have been drawn with a protractor. The side windows had much more glass, useful for rear visibility whilst parking. They didn't know it yet, but Ford stylists had hit on their new edge styling that would become so pervasive in the next decade. It wasn't just Ford's internal team that would take a shot at the car though. Ghia, Ford's design firm in Italy, also had a go. It had the same general shape of Ford's internal style, again with oval motifs and a flat grille seen on the contemporary Ford Fiesta. But it would be the Ford internal design that would move forward. Just 2 months later, it had been further refined to something close to what we now know as the car. It included that high roofline that seems so obvious now, but was so controversial at the time. But still, Ford had second thoughts about the styling. Would this edgy design work for customers? They went back to a rounded theme and showed off a pink prototype at the 1994 Geneva Motor Show, already christened the Ford car, along with a stylish logo with sweeping intersecting arcs that echoed the car's shape. The feedback was glowing, but there was a feeling that this was a striking design that Ford would never be brave enough to make. Little did they know, Ford was looking to something new, edgier. The Ford car had to be made for next to nothing, so the interior designers couldn't exactly go wild with custom parts, especially with Ford's money men counting every penny that was spent. Those swooping lines that defined the roofline were echoed in a dashboard that swept over the steering wheel with practical, stylish, spherical air vents. And unlike the Twingo, there was a little money left over for a tiny glove box. But look a little closer and you'll find switchgear from Ford's parts bin. Ford was also conscious about safety that was becoming a more important buying decision, so spent extra to include both a driver and passenger airbag. And they build in a crumple zone both in the front and behind the engine to maximise the energy absorption critical in such a small vehicle. Like the Twingo and the soon-to-be-released Apple iMac, the car will be launched with a selection of fun colours that put today's cars to shame. And while Renault refused bland colours such as black, white and silver, Ford was another beast entirely. If the customer demanded it, Ford sold it. Inside, it was more muted though. Ford was, after all, going for sophisticated. The whole interior was surprisingly more muted than what was on offer on the Fiesta. Management was so happy with the new car, they were thinking of turning it into a whole car range. What if they took the top off? What if they extended it to make a 5-door touring car? What if it became a rather natty saloon with suicide doors? And what if they shoehorned the upcoming Ford Puma's zippy Zetec engine to make the aptly named Kapow? Ford were tantalised by the possibilities, but before they could run, they needed to walk. Would their new city car be a hit with customers? The Ford car broke cover in September 1996, a mere 4 years after it was a twinkle in a Ford executive's eye. That's a remarkably short time for a brand new vehicle, and Ford was beginning to realise that sharing a chassis between models was actually a remarkable, cost-effective and quick way of making a car, especially when the Fiesta-based Ford Puma arrived a year later. It's a lesson all car manufacturers would use into the 21st century to continue to drive costs down. The motoring press praised Ford's experiment into new territory. Yes, it was a little down on power in 4th and 5th, but with it being lighter than the Fiesta, it was nimbler through the bends and fuel economy was improved as well. With exciting styling and a price lower than the Fiesta, what wasn't to like? Well, apparently for some plenty. The looks split opinion, with one person declaring,
"It doesn't look like a car."
Not quite sure they realised the irony of what they said. Like the Twingo, this was a car you fell in love with or left well alone. That was just fine with Ford though, who saw sales of 200,000 in the first year, just less than half the sales of the Fiesta, which was the #1 selling car in the UK at the time. Not bad for a car using old tooling and bits from the Fiesta parts bin. Ford, like Renault, discovered customers wanted to buy a car that stood out from the crowd. What's more, they'd pay extra for the privilege. When the car launched in 1996, it was available as a regular Ford car, or the more upmarket Car 2 that got power steering, central locking, electric windows, a nicer stereo, more adjustable seats and different wheels. But just a year later, it was joined by the pricier Car 3 that offered air conditioning, a leather steering wheel and a CD player. Ford decided to drum up interest with a single-type rally series using the amusingly titled Rally Car. Some racing took place in 1997, and the following year the Ford Car Rally Championships was created. If the car sold well in Europe, how about the antipodes? Ford corralled some cars onto a ship and started selling them in Australia and New Zealand. Ford sold them for a while, but they didn't really prove to be that popular, especially as they didn't have automatic transmission. In the UK, a van version was made for British Telecom, but this was merely a regular car with the back seats and rear windows removed. The car was selling well, at least in Europe, so what about those car variants Ford had been working on? The answer came in 2002. Ford had always been keen to produce an open-top version of the car, a cabriolet so to speak. Ghia had designed various variants of the car theme, including the Ford Setter concept that was shown in 1996 using many of the original car's parts. They'd followed it up with a public showing of the touring car concept in 1998, and Ford had shown an electric version of the car in 2000. But it was the open top that showed potential. After more work, the Ghia-designed street car concept appeared 4 years later at the 2000 Turin Motor Show. What they created was a stylish reinterpretation of the original design, with a front and rear that almost seemed to be a Mark II version of the car look. Although it looked like the street car had new front lights, they were actually the original Ford car headlights, shielded by bodywork to make them look new and fresh. Inside, the designers had gone wild with design concepts which they must have realised would never see the light of day, but the exterior got enough public approval that Ford pushed on with a production version. It was launched in 2002 with some fanfare and Kylie Minogue, giving the Ford lineup a bit of an exciting bright spot. From the outside, it looked almost untouched from the 2000 concept by Ghia, despite the fact that this was now a Pininfarina designed and built car. The zany interior had gone, replaced by the standard car swoopy dashboard goodness and a muted upmarket interior. The roof was manually operated and a little stiff, but it allowed for a good size boot. And it could be spec'd up to the max with heated leather seats, electric windows and door mirrors, air conditioning and a 6 CD changer system. A winter edition had a removable hardtop. Classic Ford, this was style and fashion on a mass-produced scale, delivering it all for the right price. The street car had also got improved suspension and a larger 1.6 litre engine. This wasn't enough to give it stunning performance, but this car was more about being seen in than going quickly. What was meant to be sporty was the sport car introduced around the same time. It got the engine and suspension from the street car, along with lowered seats to give an impression of sportiness, even if the 9.7 second 0 to 60 time underwhelmed. But like the Cabriolet, Ford missed a trick on the name. Sports car would have been a better name, or the original Kapow working name, but would that have been Carpow, Kapow, or Ka-Pow? People were still getting confused over the name of Ford's entry-level car. Ford marketed the sport car as the car's evil twin, with a memorable advert where a pigeon attempts to land on the front of the car. The car flings its bonnet up, killing the pigeon stone dead. This was early days of internet media campaigns, and Ford was hoping this would be some sort of thing that would go viral. Bird lovers hated it, but this was tame compared to what the advertising agency had originally proposed. The sport car purposely decapitating a cat with its sunroof and the headless body slowly sliding down the windscreen. It's hard to think why any advertising executive would think this would encourage customers, many of them cat lovers, to buy the car. Ford was shocked, refusing to use it, but that didn't stop some enterprising person, presumably from the advertising agency, from leaking it onto the internet, much to Ford's consternation. A regular Ford car continued to be sold without much of a styling change, but it didn't matter as it continued to sell well. Ford mined the car's success with a series of special editions. They started in 1997 with a leather-seated Lufthansa special edition for some reason, a Kugel car, K2 edition, the Car Ribic, Car Futura, Futura 2, and Car Royal followed, at least in Germany, and the Ford Capri made a comeback sort of with the Car Capri in 2001. In the UK, the regular model lineup featured silver, red and blue collection editions. Your car could be as individual as you were. Want a car with a canvas folding roof? Welcome to the Car Sun collection, sold in rainy Britain. The Car Sublime appeared in 2004, in lime of course, get it? And the Car MP3 went on sale in 2005 because MP3s were a thing the kids were into apparently. Correct me in the comments, but I don't think the Ford Car MP3 came with a USB socket. The only tie-in with MP3s I can think of would be the CD player would play MP3s burnt to a disc. That's maybe the lamest feature that's ever been advertised on the back of a car. Again, if you know anything lamer, then let me know in the comments. Brazil had begun production of the car in 1997, but it was restyled by Ford Brazil to reduce costs in 2002. They offered a smaller 1-litre engine as well as the 1.3-litre that European customers got. They decided to chart their own course with a major style update in 2007, offering more interior room and special bi-fuel engines that were needed to sell in the Brazilian market. It got another small update in 2011 along with a 1.6-litre Car Sport model. The car was something Ford of Brazil took and ran with, making it their own. Back in Europe, the car had been a hit. 12 years on, it was still selling respectably, but sales had sunk compared to the Fiesta. Ford usually stuck to a tried and tested pattern of a major update every 8 years or so, with a light refresh after 4 years. But 12 years later, the car still looked pretty much the same. The problem car manufacturers have with striking, bold, successful designs is, what's your second act? Do you make something equally as striking but different and risk alienating your customers? Or do you make the same thing, just a little bit more modern? Renault clearly had that problem with the Twingo, Audi had that problem with the TT, and Mini had it with the Mini. The Ford car was a city car, but being based on the Fiesta platform, it was always going to be about the size of a Fiesta, and Ford wanted the car to be smaller, something to get into the tightest parking spots. Competitors were moving in on Ford's market with city cars of their own. Volkswagen had made the Lupo and then the Vox and would soon launch the VW Up with versions from Skoda and Seat. Hyundai had launched the i10, Citroën the C1, Kia the Picanto, Peugeot the 107, Renault's Twingo was about to be updated and available in more countries, and then there was always the cute smart car financed by Mercedes-Benz. Fiat were working on their own city car, an update of the Fiat 500. Chassis development cost a pretty penny, so what if Ford could use one of these existing chassis for a fee, of course? Ford and Fiat struck a deal. The new car would be based on Fiat's new chassis. The new Fiat 500 launched in 2007, and the following year Ford released the new car based on the same platform. Where Fiat looked to the past, Ford's design looked to the future. But there was a family resemblance in both cars. What it didn't look like was a Mark I Ford car. Ford wasn't doing the same thing, but they hadn't come up with something as exciting as the original car. Inside, there was a lot of similarities with the Fiat 500. The high centre dashboard had many of the controls in the same place. But Ford's car got the latest gadgets: auto stop start, Bluetooth and MP3 playback through USB as well as the CD. There was a choice of a Fiat 1.2-litre petrol and 1.3-litre diesel engine, both giving about the same amount of power and neither that peppy with road noise at high speed. But although this had so many Fiat 500 parts, Ford's engineers had been let loose on the suspension, and several reviewers felt their changes made it better than Fiat's offering. Being made by American and Italian car companies, it was perhaps obvious, or not, it would be manufactured in Poland. With lower Polish labour prices, you might expect the new car to be a bit of a bargain, but that wasn't the case at all. In fact, for the same price, you could get the bigger, more practical 5-door Fiesta. Customers warmed to the cute retro looks of the Fiat 500, but weren't so keen on the Ford car's futuristic looks. To make matters worse, Ford's car was more expensive and depreciated faster, and the car's looks didn't stand out from the crowd, so there really wasn't much to recommend it. Sales figures showed that the Italians were kicking the Americans' bottom. Ford fought back with more models, or individual packs as they would say. Grand Prix, digital and tattoo models gave more individualistic styling, but sales didn't improve. If you remember, Ford of Brazil had taken the car to their hearts and produced a modified cost-reduced version in 2002, a major update in 2007, and another smaller update in 2011. It didn't stop there though. Ford saw growth in the small and city car segments, particularly in developing countries. So Ford of Brazil got the go-ahead to produce a third-generation Ford car based once again on the Ford Fiesta chassis. The result? The Ford car concept broke cover in 2013. Being based on the larger Fiesta chassis, it had grown over the previous versions of the car, 26 centimeters longer, and it was taller too. But that meant the car had 5 doors for the first time, something that the competition had been offering for a while. It had a similar smooth, rounded shape to the Fiesta and other cars of the time, designed to perform well in the wind tunnel. An unoffensive, middle-of-the-road look then. Although it was just a concept, behind the scenes the car was rapidly moving to production. And just 1 year later, the new Ford car hatchback and saloon hit Brazilian showrooms. This wasn't just a car for Brazil though, this was going to be Ford's worldwide entry-level model. A second production line started in India, and in 2015 the car was launched there as the Ford Figo and Ford Figo Aspire. They came with a range of petrol and diesel engines from 1 litre to 1.5 litre, giving either speed or fuel economy. These engines were married to either a 5-speed manual or 6-speed dual-clutch power-shift gearbox. There were always razor-thin margins on small city cars, but Ford thought that they could turn a profit by selling the new Brazilian Ford car in Europe thanks to low-cost Indian production. So the new model appeared in Europe in 2016, dubbed the Ford Ka Plus because it was bigger than the old Ford car. The similarities with the Fiesta didn't end on the outside. Inside it had a bit of a Fiesta vibe going on, but materials felt cheaper, so it felt like the shrunken, cost-reduced Fiesta that it was. But that didn't mean the Ka Plus was basic though. The base model got electric front windows and mirrors, power-assisted steering, ABS, a tyre pressure monitoring system, and a raft of airbags. Options included many of the same gadgets on the Fiesta, including Ford's voice control sync system that was proving to be a runaway hit. All in all, it was a good vehicle. The new Ford car's shape was practical and showed just how much space you could get out of a small package. But unlike the original car, it didn't break boundaries. Maybe this was because it was only the second new car Ford's Brazilian stylists had designed. They were still learning to run. Maybe they didn't feel that they could push back to Ford's management in Detroit, especially when producing a world car that they felt shouldn't offend too many people. But the new Ford car didn't make the design statement the original car had. By slavishly following Ford's kinetic design language, they made it look like a miniature version of the rest of Ford's range. There was just no pizzazz. And if you don't give people a reason to fall in love with the car, don't be surprised when they don't. Sales of the third generation car, at least in Europe, never took off. Ford had pitched the Ka Plus as being great value, and indeed it was. It was a third less than the equivalent Fiesta. But it was going up against competition from Dacia, Hyundai, Skoda, Vauxhall and Volkswagen, all of which cost less. And maybe that spoke less to the Ford's Ka Plus being a good deal, and more to the Fiesta being a bit too expensive. Customers plumped for cheaper city cars like the VW Up or cuter cars like the Fiat 500 that continued to outsell Ford's car even though the shape hadn't been updated. And class action lawsuits related to the Ford car's power shift gearbox can't have helped sales either. In an effort to sell the Car Plus to customers who were increasingly looking at crossovers, Ford showed the chunkier Urban Warrior concept at the Sao Paulo International Motor Show in Brazil in 2018. But like Rover's attempts at livening up the range with an off-roading car that never left the tarmac, there wasn't much interest from customers. The car's features were steadily improved, with Sync 3 large screens offering emergency assistance, navigation, and the ability to search for the best parking spaces. But sales didn't improve, and Ford announced the end of worldwide Ford car production in 2019. It disappeared from Ford's European showrooms in 2020 and from Brazilian showrooms in 2021. The same year, Ford exited from the whole Indian market. So although I don't have data for Ford car sales outside Europe, it seems that sales in Brazil and India can't have been that much better. There have been many cars that have been a fashion hit, including Ford's own Capri in 1970. But not many keep selling and selling and selling with only small styling tweaks to become a classic. Rover had the Land Rover, BMC the Mini, Citroën the 2CV, Volkswagen the Beetle, and Fiat the 500, not once but maybe twice the way it's going. Ford hoped the car would be a similar long-term hit, maybe their first since the Ford Model T, and maybe that's why they left it 12 years before updating it. But it wasn't to be. While you can occasionally see an original Beetle, Mini or 2CV on the road, first-generation Ford cars are almost impossible to spot today due to their propensity to rust. Most car production ends with a whimper, either because new generations miss the mark or tastes change. That clearly happened to the Ford car, but what should be remembered is Ford's stylists and management in the early 1990s who dared to dream of a cool contemporary alternative to the Fiesta and found creative ways to launch such an inexpensive, exciting car. There's the usual optional extra video if you're interested, but I would highly recommend this book, which is what I got some of the early information about the Ford car from. This is Steve Saxty's next book about secret Fords. The first one was about the 70s and the 80s. This one's more about the 1990s, and I cannot really recommend it highly enough. Yes, he did send me a copy, but I'm not just saying this because he sent me a copy. This is a very high quality book, and if you're interested in Fords and particularly the behind the scenes design stuff and stuff that just never happened, this is really a very high quality book to get. So I'd highly recommend it. There's a link in the description if you're interested. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.